You know that I appreciate each and every one of you tuning in and listening as you do. If you came here by accident, stick around. You might find something interesting, especially if you are a college football fan, because last night, the College Football Playoff Committee and the half-hour television program that is Let's Update the Rankings, which happens before the committee starts giving us rankings without the television program, right? Like we get the AP polls. We're going to get the USA Today poll and the coaches poll and all these other polls, plus whatever publications release their power rankings. And we get all of that stuff without a TV show. But now the committee is here. They're here. And because they are here, we have to televise it. There's got to be a TV show around it, even though like 25 minutes of this half an hour show, you're just gas bags talking about what they think should be the rankings and yada, 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 yada. It's nice to have that recap of the college football season because, you know, like who has time to sit down and watch every conference, right? Like some of us are college football nerds with way too much time on our hands, but most of us just have other things we need to do in life, and nobody can sit down and go, well, who's the best of the Big Ten this year? Like, we're just not going to do that. So with that being said, the rankings come out, they're televised, and yeah, I'm looking at it, and I'm not saying I disagree. And then what I said yesterday was that this is important not because it matters, right? But because this gives you some insight into the mind of the committee. It gives you some insight into what it is that they find important, right? And one of the things that we learned that they find important is strength of schedule. If you notice, Georgia's number 1 over Alabama. Let me just go ahead and read the top 10 here. 1 is Georgia, 2 Alabama, 3 Notre Dame, 4 Clemson, 5 Oklahoma, 6 Ohio State, 7 Penn State, 8 TCU, 9 Wisconsin, and 10 Miami. So you look at a bunch of schools, there's a bunch of one-loss to undefeated schools on this list. A lot of people thought that maybe Wisconsin would be higher. A lot of people thought that maybe Miami would be higher because they are both undefeated. But no, they are 9 and 10 behind a bunch of one-loss schools. And the reason why they are 9 and 10 behind a bunch of one-loss schools is the schedule. Notre Dame, Clemson, Oklahoma, Ohio State, Penn State, and TCU are all one-loss schools with really tough schedules, or at least tougher schedules than Wisconsin and Miami. I wouldn't argue the TCU schedule is particularly tough, but their schedule does matter, and then TCU does have a couple of quality wins on that schedule. But yeah, you put them above Wisconsin and Miami, even though they lost their one game, and they did lose to Iowa State, which is just horrific. But yeah, you see that, and you go, okay, there's a theme here, right? Georgia's number 1, Alabama's number 2, which maybe looks like a bold move on the part of the committee, but it isn't really. Georgia's schedule is better than Alabama's to this point. Now, by the end of the season, we'll see. Notre Dame, ranked number 3 over Clemson. Why? Notre Dame's schedule is better than Clemson's schedule. And specifically, Notre Dame's one loss to Georgia is better than Clemson's one loss. So strength of schedule is the theme. Now, here's the thing, and we've learned this in previous years. The theme can change. But this so far is what we've got to go on with regards to what it is that the committee thinks when they rank all of these teams, which is hugely important if you're Georgia. Because it means, or what you hope that it means, is that say you end up rolling up on Alabama in the title game, right? Which is heavily likely at this point. If you roll up on Alabama in the title game and Alabama hands you your first loss and you were both undefeated up until that point, if your schedule was tougher than Alabama's schedule, that doesn't sink you. If your schedule was tougher than Notre Dame's schedule, Clemson's schedule, Oklahoma's schedule, and it's definitely tougher than Oklahoma's schedule, that doesn't sink you. That doesn't knock you out of the playoff. Right? Especially if it's a good game, especially if it's a close game. Now, we can get a little bit later into whether or not Alabama is even going to be undefeated when they get there, because Alabama's got a very difficult game against LSU coming up this week. And I say very difficult, but here's a school that's very familiar with you. They know you. You know them. It's a rivalry game. These things always tend to get fairly ridiculous. So I would say something of a difficult game. Plus, you know, it's LSU, man. They're playing some pretty good football too. Not good enough to really be in playoff considerations. But when you consider that LSU might be the team to derail this whole Alabama train, I mean, this is it right here. Like this is the most viable LSU team, I think, to have to be capable of beating Alabama. But you look at the schedule, and this is why scheduling good opponents matters, because you see teams that are one-loss schools even further down this list, but they haven't played anybody, right? Oklahoma State, Washington, Virginia Tech, 11, 12, and 13. That's where they're ranked. And they're all one-loss schools. But Oklahoma State doesn't play anybody. And Washington, outside of the Pac-12, doesn't play anybody. And Virginia Tech, outside of the ACC, doesn't play anybody. And that is where you're getting punished. It's not like Georgia's schedule is the toughest schedule, but they've beaten teams pretty badly. They ran through Mississippi State. That's a quality football team. They beat Notre Dame. And the way that they beat Notre Dame was to basically strategically take pressure off of young Jake Fromm. And they beat Notre Dame primarily by being a ground team, which is hard to do. The two victories there, that's a tough schedule. But it's not the toughest schedule, but they're undefeated. So you're trying to prioritize a bunch of different things if you're the committee. And I think that overall the committee did a good job. Now, here's where I have a quibble with them, right? Here's my one gripe with this first set of rankings from the committee. Ready? Here we go. It's this. Oklahoma is in front of Ohio State, right? That to me is weird because, as I mentioned before, strength of schedule is where the theme of this lies. This is about strength of schedule. And yet, Oklahoma is in front of Ohio State. Oklahoma is a one-loss school. Ohio State is a one-loss school. The deal here is that Ohio State's one loss came at the hands of Oklahoma. But if this is about strength of schedule, why isn't Ohio State over Oklahoma? Ohio State's schedule is tougher than Oklahoma's schedule. They've played better opponents. The Big Ten is a better league. Why is Ohio State behind Oklahoma if strength of schedule is what matters here? And not only that, but I would argue that at this point in the season, Ohio State is better than Oklahoma is. You could not have made that argument earlier in the year. But we treat all of these teams like they're static, right? Like this is the same team that's been playing all year, and that's not necessarily true. This Ohio State team, the Ohio State team as they are right now, the one that beat Penn State on Saturday, this Ohio State team is better than the Ohio State team that lost to Oklahoma earlier in the year. They're not the same team. And the reason why they're not the same team is because JT Barrett is not the same quarterback. Looked like a shell of himself at the beginning of the season. And Urban Meyer made an incredible decision, right? Urban Meyer tuned out the noise. And there were bozos and yahoos that were basically saying, done, it's a wrap, close up the shop, and start somebody that's not JT Barrett. JT Barrett, a has-been. JT Barrett looks washed up. JT Barrett looks rattled. Boy looks shook. And instead, JT Barrett has turned around. He's found a rhythm. He's come into his own again. And he now looks like the kind of quarterback that we thought at the beginning of the year. Like, and if Urban Meyer had given up on JT Barrett, Ohio State never even has a chance. And it's crazy to me because it's alarming how dominant Ohio State can look when JT Barrett is great. He's been great lately. And to me, it makes no sense to put Oklahoma and their weaker schedule and their horrible loss, right? Forget who it was that Oklahoma lost to, but they were 20-point favorites and they lost the game. You can't put Oklahoma and their bad loss and their awful schedule ahead of Ohio State, who's playing a better schedule, a tougher schedule, and has, at this moment, the better quarterback. Like, I'm looking at this team and I'm going, Ohio State's way better than Oklahoma. If this is about strength of schedule, you put Ohio State in front of Oklahoma. And I understand putting Oklahoma in front with regards to the fact that, yeah, they did beat them in a head-to-head matchup. But does that matter? They played. Ohio State was a worse football team. Right? So the thing that's supposed to be rewarded in sports the most, and not just sports, by the way, we reward everything like this, is consistency. The reason why when you watch the Super Bowl, it's not necessarily the two best teams playing, because they're the most consistent teams playing. The teams that can win on the road, in the cold, in a dome, at home, doesn't matter, neutral location. The team that's able to win in a greater variety of circumstances, that's the team that we reward, right? And the reason why you want home field advantage if you are a football team entering the playoffs in the NFL, or any sport really, why you want home field advantage is because it provides you an opportunity to be more consistent, which we reward. You have a higher likelihood of actually winning, you have a higher likelihood of actually winning a title if you are a more consistent football team. When we say that a football team gets hot, like, yeah, this team got hot entering the postseason, or a baseball team gets hot entering the postseason, what are we saying? We are saying that they are winning a lot consistently lately. Right? So they won consistently enough to make it to the playoffs. And then once they made it there, they just started winning a lot. And they were more consistent than everybody else at winning. That's what we mean when we say someone got hot. And we don't just do this in sports. In business, in art, in war, in politics. If you are not consistent, you're gone. Right? Like, I remember, and I was pretty young when it was happening, when George Bush was going up against John Kerry Bush was going for a second term. And I remember watching TV, and the one thing that people criticized John Kerry about, I mean, just stab the guy to death over this, in terms of just stabbing his character to death, just stomp the guy out, is that John Kerry was not consistent. John Kerry changed his mind on so many things so frequently that it was alarming. That to suggest that somehow John Kerry was a flip-flopper was the most obvious thing, right? Though, what is flip-flopping really, other than, oh, I have been provided new information, and that information is better than the information that I've had, and I'm going to change my mind. Now, he did it too much, though. But my point is, he wasn't consistent, and there was a penalty to pay for him not being consistent. And you could say whatever it was that you wanted to say about George W. Bush, because George W. Bush didn't exactly have high presidential approval ratings when he ran for president. Just he was more consistent. And you could say the same thing for Obama when he ran against Romney, right? That people were liking Mitt Romney, and then that video comes out about him, talking about poor people in a way that made everybody upset. Well, why does that hammer him? Well, that hammers him because it makes him look inconsistent as a person. You can't say you care about people, and then there's a video of you sounding like you don't care about people. Right? Because again, going into his second term, Obama didn't exactly have the greatest approval numbers either, right? So when you look at it, you go, consistency is the thing that ultimately winds up being rewarded. And it's art, right? What happens if you are a musical artist and you released an album and the album is great and it's a classic, and then 6 years later you release an album and the album stinks, and then you release another album, the album's worse, and then you release another album, the album's okay. We forget about you, right? Like your money stream, your revenue will dry up faster than you will believe. If you wind up as an actor and you are in a bunch of terrible movies, see how fast you turn from being George Clooney to Nicolas Cage. Remember when Nicolas Cage was a good actor? Right? Like we make fun of Nick Cage and how Nick Cage acts because he's kind of weird. But Nick Cage, legitimately, people used to like the way that he acted. And then he found himself in about 13 horrible movies. And all of a sudden, yeah, we were done with Nick Cage. Wasn't consistent. Right? Like, dude was not consistent. And there's a penalty to be paid for not being consistent, even if the inconsistency isn't at all your fault. There's still a penalty to be paid. And what I'm wondering here with the college football committee, all that blathering to say this, I don't know if they're rewarding consistency, because Ohio State has been consistently better and better every single week. They look like a dominant, overpowering machine of a football team. And they are better now than they were earlier in the year. And they are still getting punished for the one loss that they had, even though they have been overall consistent and arguably getting consistently better. Right? To the point where I believe Ohio State plays Oklahoma right now. Oklahoma does not beat Ohio State. I don't think so. And so, yeah, you're a Georgia fan. That's something to look out for, because you could be consistent all year long. Right? You could have a tougher schedule than Alabama all year long. And if you are undefeated in the title game and Alabama is undefeated in the title game, they might go ahead and put Alabama above you. And then if any other team hasn't lost in a while, you might find yourself out of the playoff. And I understand that maybe that's not going to happen, and I hope that it doesn't, because that would be incredibly unfair. But I'm saying they've already set up a tiny little precedent where we're not going to reward the team that's most consistent. And this is my issue with having a committee decide playoff spots. Having a group of people who sit down and watch games just sort of figure it out is like, ultimately, what do they know? Right? They're former coaches and they're journalists and they're analysts. And so they have more information than the rest of us. But unless they can see the future, they don't have the information that's important, that's more than the rest of us. And I want to know what the importance of consistency is in their mind, especially gradual improvement throughout the year. Because if what you want in the college football playoff are the teams with the best records and the strongest schedules, you can get that. But that's not necessarily the four best teams. And what I want is the four best teams, not the team that lost the longest time ago. I want the team that played the toughest schedule, was overwhelmingly good for most of the year, and is going to be overwhelmingly good in the playoff. I want the four best teams. Clutch with Keon Rose on Nooga Radio, NoogaRadio.com. So I want to say some things about some stuff that coaches have said, right? Because coaches are interesting to me in a lot of ways. In large part because the kind of person that it takes to be a coach is the kind of person that most of us would not like if we had to meet this person. Right? Like, if you like your coach as your coach, you would not like that coach as a friend. I promise. If you are an Alabama fan and you like Nick Saban as your coach, you wouldn't actually want to hang around with Nick Saban for long periods of time. You would be bored to tears. First off, Nick Saban only wants to talk football, and talk football on a level that you or I can't understand. That's one. Two, Nick Saban's not a nice guy, because nice guys don't end up being good coaches, really. most of the time, right? Like you get your exceptions. Right? Dick Vermeil was a nice guy, like legitimately nice dude, but like mostly coaches have to be disagreeable in nature in order to get the most out of people, right? And so Kirby Smart was saying that the number one ranking for Georgia in the college football playoff means nothing. And he's absolutely right. Like the ranking does not tell you if you're going to be in the top 4 by the time the season ends. If you don't continue winning, you won't be in the playoff, right? Like that's just pretty much what this is. That's just pretty much what this is. You won't be in the playoff, which is unfortunate, right? Absolutely sucks. So yeah, Kirby Smart's absolutely right. He's saying something that's coach speak, right? But if you don't keep winning, you're not in the playoff. Now, the other coach that had something to say about the playoff is University of Michigan head coach Jim Harbaugh, who said that they should expand the playoff to a 16-team playoff. And he says, people will complain about the amount of football that would have to be played for that to happen. But here's the issue. First off, you don't play a ton of football unless you continue to win. So there's that. Secondly, teams already play a bunch of football if you get into the playoff, right? That if you play in the Big Ten, for instance, you play in the Big Ten title game, first round of the playoff, if you win that, then you play in the title game, the national title game, if you win that. And that already puts you at a lot more football than anybody else has played. What I'm trying to understand, though, is Jim Harbaugh wanting to do away with conference title games? Because if you still play your conference title game, then all you're doing is now adding all this new football on top of football you are already playing. And that's a lot to ask of college guys. To ask college guys to basically play, if they continue to win, an NFL schedule worth amount of football. Like, that's a lot. That's a lot. And at some point, you're going to have to start like dropping that facade of college athletics if that's what you're going to do with this. Put people's bodies at risk for a very long time so that we can have more teams in the playoff, right? But Harbaugh wants the 16-team playoff. And while I admit that would actually be exciting because you'd get 8 games in the first round rather than just 2, I understand why you can't make that a possibility. Right? Like it would be thrilling. But you can't do it. It's not really feasible. But I'll get into why we need people like Jim Harbaugh next. Clutch with Keon Rose on Nooga Radio, NoogaRadio.com.
The Tennessee Valley's news talk leader, Nooga Radio, digital FM 95.3 HD4 and 92.7 FM. 3, 2, 1. Chattanooga Radio, digital FM 95.3 HD4, 92.7 FM's news now.
An 11-year-old boy crumpled by a hit-and-run driver in a black sedan. This happened at 3 p.m. on Dodson Avenue in Chattanooga. The police say the young man tried to cross the roadway when a driver coming the opposite direction hit him and then sped away before the police could get there. They're now trying to track down a black sedan. The young man in stable condition at the hospital. Firefighters in Collegedale were fighting a house fire when an explosion rocked the building, breaking windows and throwing 2 volunteer firefighters out the front door onto the front porch. They were taken to the hospital for treatment for minor injuries. The house fire was taken into control, and damage is still being estimated to cause the explosion, also being investigated. The man who was killed in an industrial accident in Dalton, Georgia at the Shaw plant has been identified as Jesus Pimentel. He was crushed between 2 pieces of machinery. Russell Stroud, Nooga Radio News Talk 92.7. Now.
Traffic, news, and information. Nooga Radio, digital FM 95.3 HD4 and 92.7 FM.
Goss Insurance. Yes, we are local. And no, we don't have an 800 number. In fact, our mobile numbers are on our business cards. We live, work, play, and worship in Chattanooga, and we would love to help with your insurance. Business, auto, home, life insurance. Call now, save money. Call Goss Insurance for all your insurance needs. Goss Insurance, 875-2500. 875-2500.
Power Hour News at noon and 9 being brought to you by Greg's Sandwich Works, featuring the best cuts of meats for your sandwich. Get $1 off your Tuesday taco salad. Just mention Nooga Radio. Greg's Sandwich Works, 6337 East Brainerd Road, Chattanooga.
Nooga Radio, digital FM 95.3 HD4 and 92.7 FM knows your opinion is important. So call 800-8949. Agree or disagree? Call 423-800-8949. 800-8949. Nooga Radio, 92.7 FM and 95.3 HD4. News Talk Nooga Radio.
Coaches are the most interesting people on this planet. I mean, college football coaches. My brother would disagree. My brother, who I bring on the show from time to time to help me break down NBA stuff because he watches way more basketball than me. Like, nobody has that much time to watch basketball except him. But anyway, he disagrees with me. He finds football coaches to be ultimately uninteresting people. And I will say this. Football coaches are verbally boring. Football coaches say stuff because that's the thing you're supposed to say, which is ultimately a boring way to talk, right? You ever listen to an interview or watch an interview on TV and the guy who's interviewing doesn't really react to the person he's interviewing? He just sort of reads the next question and reads the next question. That is a guy saying the thing you're supposed to say next. So he just says it. Like, that's not interesting at all. And college football coaches and football coaches in general tend to be that most of the time. I would say Coach Hayden Clark of the GDFL, who we've had on the show a number of times, he's possibly the most interesting coach I've ever talked to, right? He's got an incredible story, an incredible faith, an incredible he's had to overcome in his life, and getting the Eagles to the GDFL title game basically in year one. I mean, it's an incredible display of talent and heart from him and his team. So, I mean, it's not to say that interesting coaches don't exist. It's that by and large, especially the higher up you go, you start getting to the heights of college football, you start getting to the NFL, and you get to coaches that just say stuff because it's the thing you're supposed to say. Coaches don't like controversy because controversy brings more unwanted attention, and there's nothing that coaches hate more than unwanted attention. So I get it. But that doesn't mean that coaches are uninteresting. That means that they just say uninteresting stuff. And that's not the same thing at all. Okay? Right? So Jim Harbaugh, first off, is a guy that both says interesting stuff and is interesting. And he's been lobbying for a 16-team playoff because he is a crazy person. And before we just dismiss Jim Harbaugh's idea, like right off the bat, which I want to, and sort of started doing before the break, you need to understand we need guys like that in this world. Guys that just say crazy stuff. Because a lot of the best ideas that we have come from crazy people. People who are kind of nuts. That's the reason why when you look at great artists are kind of crazy. Right? I mean, you can look at Picasso. Salvador Dali was definitely crazy. He said the difference between him and an actual crazy person is that he knew he was crazy. Crazy people will tell you they're not crazy, but Salvador Dali knew he was crazy, and that was the point. It's just one of those things. You find that people who come up with innovations, when you first see them, you think that they are crazy. And maybe they are a little bit crazy, but it's because they're a little bit crazy that we come up with these great innovations. And I don't know if there's a solution to the 16-team playoff conundrum. I don't think we ever get to 16 teams. But I will say this. We will expand it because we're having flaws with this already. Now, when we have a 14 playoff, teams are going to get left out that deserve to be in, right? More than 4 teams deserve to be in, but you only got 4 spots. And that's pretty much it. And the issue, of course, is that if you expand it to 16 teams, 16 teams will get in, right? But there will be more than 16 teams worthy of getting in. You will never fix this problem. Now, you will fix this problem for Jim Harbaugh, who, if you did expand the playoff to 16 teams, might have a shot, if he continues to coach at Michigan, of having one of the 16 teams worthy of getting in. He might have a chance. What you would be solving at that point if you expanded to a 16-team playoff would be a specific Jim Harbaugh problem. That's about it. This year. But coach at Michigan and you're Jim Harbaugh and you coach there long enough, you would be coaching a specific you'd be solving a specific Jim Harbaugh problem. Team that is capable of being a top 16 team just based on clout, just based on ability to recruit, just based on coaching talent. Come on. He'd have a shot eventually. And then once you get into the playoff, well, then it's anybody's business what happens there. And football is the kind of sport where you could put together some kind of run. Saying that the problem isn't the amount of teams, right? The problem with college football has never been the lack of a playoff of teams. It's how you decide. Once upon a time in the BCS series, we had, and I don't know about you, like computers are great at a lot of stuff. I don't really want computers calculating out and who is 2. Right? That seems odd. Would never have a chance to get in because they're never going to reach the computer's calculations. And you really want a computer calculating all this stuff out? Like it. I don't see it as something that's feasible, nor does it make sense. 2, I don't think a committee of people is that much better. Like, there has to be some way of gathering representatives from all the different leagues. Hey, I never thought that the problem with college football was the format, right? Like, I never thought that our problem was that we didn't have a playoff, right? So now I'm not going to think that our problem is that we have too small of a playoff. It's that the way that we choose the teams still leaves too much subjectivity. It leaves way too much subjectivity. Good. This is sports. The one thing that we all like about sports is that, yeah, there is a subjective nature to it, right? Like, we all have opinions on stuff, but there's also objectivity to it as well. Because if the Dodgers or the Astros are able to win in the World Series tonight, they will have followed the same process to get to the very end of that game, determining who is the best in the league. And everyone had a chance to follow that process. Objective. It's objective. It lines up. My problem with that, of course, is this is a committee. We've got college football. We got a committee. That's not objective. And while there are a lot of artistic parts to sports, sports are not art. The team that scores more points than the other team wins the game, even if they do so in a way that is hideous and ugly. And I'm not a fan of trying to expand the playoff if the method that we're going to use to choose these teams are not objective. There's no based system. And I understand that the different conferences are all different sizes, but there's got to be some way to come out on top of your conference, to be one of the top handful of teams in your conference that get an opportunity to go on and do this kind of thing outside of, yeah, we played in the title game. Because I don't know if you've noticed, we've got 5 conferences and we have 4 spots. So there's still going to be a subjective measure to it. Right now, you can expand it enough to include all the conferences. It just starts to get a little sillier that way. But the problem here is that we have a committee deciding the teams, not that the playoff is too small. You expand the playoff, and like I said before, you expand the playoff from 4 teams to 8 teams, from 8 teams to 16 teams, and all you will do is increase the amount of teams worthy of getting in. Keon Rose on Nooga Radio, NoogaRadio.com. So Ed Orgeron, by the way, is a character study on what it is for your football team to have a personality. Ed Orgeron said the truest statement that any coach has ever said, which is that he said that he does not turn on the internet. Right? He was asked about criticism and his team, and he said he does not turn on the internet. Which is how I know for an absolute fact that Ed Orgeron does not use the internet, because you don't turn on the internet. That's ridiculous. But because Ed Orgeron doesn't turn on the internet, I know he doesn't use the internet. That is a fact. Right? Ed Orgeron is LSU. I want him to be there forever. Like, that's such a good fit. They're kind of a rough and tumble team. And we're hoping that Matt Canada has the kind of offense that makes LSU football exciting in the way that it never really was under Les Miles, right? Like, Les Miles made LSU football at times very, very good, right? And arguably even great at points. But Les Miles never made LSU football fun. The one thing you don't want to be in football, say in life, but let's just say football right now, is to be bad and boring. Right? You can make an argument. Kim Kardashian is bad. Right? Like, what does she do? What does Kim Kardashian actually do? Kim Kardashian doesn't have a skill or a talent. She really just capitalized on being involved in a sex tape. I'm not entirely certain how, but she did. But I'll tell you what, Kim Kardashian is not boring. Right? She is a wizard on social media. People watch her reality show. She's not boring. Right? She may not be good at anything, but she ain't boring. And some people are the other way. Right? Like, think of a lot of scientists and mathematicians. These people are brilliant. And these are people that come up with stuff that allow it to be possible for us to use computers and drive cars. They're great, but you wouldn't want to have dinner with these people. They're boring. At least they'd be boring to you, right? Like, maybe they wouldn't be boring to other mathematicians and physicists and so on, but to you and me, they'd be boring. I mean, we have nothing to talk about that we'd want to talk about. But they're great. And Les Miles had that going for a little bit at LSU, that LSU was good. So under Les Miles, LSU was boring. They were always boring, but they were good. They were good. The issue, of course, is when they got to be bad too, now they were bad and boring. That's typically when a coach gets fired, is when your team is bad and your team is boring. You are not much long for coaching football. I can promise you that, right? Like, Tennessee has entered that territory where Butch Jones has kept Tennessee at sort of average to slightly above average. But Butch is boring. Been boring. So yeah, guess what? Ugh. You're not long for the job, man. Keon Rose on Nooga Radio, NoogaRadio.com. was brought in to fix LSU's offense. The reason why I like Matt Canada is the reason why I hate a lot of other coaches, right? Not that they deserve it, but, here's the thing. Offensive coaches tend to, when they're really good, tend to be considered quarterback whisperers. Right? Or they tend to be considered gurus. And I said, you got to be careful. Anybody that's considered a quarterback whisperer, you've got to be careful of that person. Because you can't make a bad quarterback good. And anybody that promises that is insane. Right? And I would say the same thing about anybody in your actual life. Like might actually be a scammer. If someone promises to just fix your life instantly, if someone is a guru and they say they can show up and they can fix everything about your life and it's going to be instant, that person is trying to deceive you. Now, here's what LSU wants to overcome. They want to overcome, against Alabama, the offensive inefficiency that has plagued them forever. Now, LSU looks better this year. They look like an offensively explosive team. They look like a team that can play. And when you got Darius Geis, and why? And that's the thing I like about Matt Canada. He doesn't show up and just fix your offense, right? He's using personnel that gets the best out of players and puts guys in a position to likely succeed. The key for LSU having a shot at beating Alabama this Saturday has more to do with the running game than the passing game. Your quarterback is Danny Etling, okay? Up and make Danny Etling some kind of playmaking mastermind. It's not about to happen. Right? LSU has not beaten Alabama in 6 years. It's 6 years of none. And during those 6 years, LSU has not been able to run the ball against Alabama. Haven't. These are the numbers for the last 6 years of LSU versus Alabama. Going back to 2012. In 2012, they rushed for 39 yards. In 2000, and then the second time they faced them in 2012, they rushed for 139 yards, but only 2.8 yards a carry. 2013, 43 yards. In 2014, 183 yards, which feels impressive until you realize that it took them 56 attempts, and they scored no touchdowns running the ball, and they rushed for only 3.3 yards a carry. They rushed for 54 yards. In 2016, they rushed for 33. Able to consistently run the ball against Alabama. Either they run the ball and rack up a lot of yards, but they rack up a lot of yards by running the ball a ton, so it's completely useless and inefficient running. Don't attempt rushes that much, and they don't get anywhere at all. With Matt Canada. Matt Canada is going to give Nick Saban a test this weekend, in large part because Matt Canada is about personnel usage and about trickery, right? Matt Canada will use different formations. Well, no, he'll use the same formation to give defenses a tendency and then flip the script halfway through the game. It's special. He is very good at this. It's something that he was very good at Pitt. It's something that he's been very good at everywhere he's gone. And he's turned quarterbacks who maybe were not seen as good quarterbacks or great quarterbacks into really good quarterbacks, right? Like Nathan Peterman got drafted out of Pitt in large part to the existence of Matt Canada. Nathan Peterman, who was a one-time Tennessee Volunteer before transferring out. Like, we didn't even really get the chance to know Nathan Peterman. That's how long Nathan Peterman was here. Like a cup of coffee. But it's not like Matt Canada showed up and just turned Nathan Peterman into this world beater. What he did was set up an offense around Peterman that took advantage of misdirection and deception. And why we've been getting better performances out of Danny Etling. He's still not great. He's still not great. But he's not dumb. Right? And so that football intelligence can be put to good use. The question here is, will that be enough to pressure Alabama for Darius Geist to be able to free himself up and really get out there and punish Alabama's defense, right? Which is hard to do running the ball. And this, by the way, is an important game because either there's going to be a blueprint here for Georgia to follow title game or not, right? Because Alabama's allowing 66.4 rushing yards a game. And at that point, you have to think, really run on Alabama. It's hard to run on this football team. And if that is primarily your bread and butter, as it is for LSU, and as it is more so for Georgia, then you have to think that the way to defeat it is going to be with some level of a vertical attack, which as it's been pointed out many times to us, Jake Fromm has not needed to do. Can he do that better than Danny Etling? Though as a freshman, how much better? I'm not entirely certain. I don't have the answers to those questions. But I'm looking at this matchup and I'm going, Alabama's had a top 10 nationally ranked rushing defense every year since 2008. Teams that primarily run the ball struggle against Alabama. And one of the reasons, by the way, that we've had such awful Alabama LSU games, low-scoring games of just sadness and misery, is in large part because both of these defenses are, right? Like don't sleep on LSU. LSU's defense is particularly stout, and they take away the run as well. Low-scoring drecks of football games in large part because both of these teams take away the run, right? This has been a pretty good passer this year, but he hasn't been great. And you could argue that one of the games that really caused his downturn as a passer last year was the game against LSU, where LSU made it very difficult for that young man to throw the ball. Now we've got year 2 Jalen Hurts, and we've got Danny Etling in an offensive system that does rely on him a whole lot more and ask him to do a whole lot more. And he has been on some level delivering. Whoever passes the ball the best in this game is the team that's capable of winning. Are we going to see another low-scoring affair, or are we going to finally see the offensive eruption that LSU and Alabama could provide if they wanted to play that way? It's hard for LSU to score. Sometimes they struggle. We saw that in the Troy game. They struggle to get offense going at times. It happens. Like the second half of the Troy game is the LSU team we were all used to, but at that point they were playing from behind. Step up to the plate and really make Alabama pay. That depends on Matt Canada. And if you can do it, LSU, then it stands to reason that there is some level of a blueprint laid out where you can do it as Georgia. Now, granted, Darius Geist is great, but Darius Geist is not Nick Chubb and Sony Michel, right? Like, he is only one back. And there's only so much you can ask a guy to do against the defense that stingy. Can LSU do it? I guess we'll see on Saturday. Clutch with Keon Rose on Nooga Radio, NoogaRadio.com, 92.7 FM. We're going to ask some more questions that need to be answered on Saturday, as well as re-examining Jarrett Stidham. He might be the quarterback that Auburn's needed all along, and being impatient. Florida's next head coach is going to have unreal expectations. Next.
The Tennessee Valley's news talk leader, Nooga Radio, Digital FM 95.3 HD4 and 92.7 FM.
3, 2, 1.
Chattanooga Radio, Digital FM 95.3 HD4, 92.7 FM's news now.
An 11-year-old boy crumpled by a hit-and-run driver in a black sedan. This happened at 3 p.m. on Dodson Avenue in Chattanooga. The police say the young man tried to cross the roadway when a driver coming the opposite direction hit him and then sped away before the police could get there. They're now trying to track down a black sedan. The young man in stable condition at the hospital. Firefighters in Collegedale were fighting a house fire when an explosion rocked the building, breaking windows and throwing 2 volunteer firefighters out the front door onto the front porch. They were taken to the hospital for treatment for minor injuries. The house fire was taken into control, and damage is still being estimated to cause the explosion, also being investigated. The man who was killed in an industrial accident in Dalton, Georgia at the Shaw plant has been identified as Jesus Pimentel. He was crushed between 2 pieces of machinery. Russell Stroud, Nooga Radio News Talk 92.7. Now.
Expect lots of clouds and milder weather out there through your nighttime hours. Lows into the lower 50s. For Thursday and Friday, mostly cloudy. A few windy scattered showers will move through. Warm highs into the lower 70s with more unseasonably warm weather back into the mid-70s for the weekend. Head to the JCPenney Black Friday mattress sale. Now through Saturday, get 60% off mattresses from brands like Sealy, Serta, Beautyrest, and Stearns & Foster. That's getting your pennies worth at JCPenney. And I'm Storm Team 12 Chief Meteorologist Patrick Cole.
The Tennessee Valley's news talk leader, Nooga Radio, Digital FM 95.3 HD4 and 92.7 FM.
Cash, 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 and more cash. Watch it gush out of your TV. Rick Davis is on national TV. Wow. Golden diamonds, coins, and more riches. Rick's selling, Rick's buying, and he's on national TV. Watch him Wednesday, 11 p.m. right after the Judy O'Neill Talk Show. North Georgia Cable TV 265. You won't want to miss it. It's a mountain of cash, cash, cash. And it's catching the Hollywood spotlight. Hey, if one day hasn't got your head spinning, how about a second? Rick Davis is on Fridays, Channel 12, 10:30 a.m., right before The Price is Right. You gotta see it to believe it. Wednesday, 11 p.m., North Georgia Cable Channel 265. Friday, 10:30 a.m. on TV 12. WPLZ HD4 Ottawa. W224AZ Chattanooga.
92.7, Digital FM 95.3 HD4. Chattanooga.
Charges filed in the New York truck attack.
We now have him charged with federal crimes of terrorism.
The Fed holds steady on interest rates.
They basically are saying this economy looks pretty good. Activity is very solid.
This is the CBS World News Roundup Late Edition. I'm Pam Coulter. The 29-year-old Uzbek native held in the truck attack that killed 8 people in Lower Manhattan yesterday is now charged with deadly violence using a motor vehicle and providing material support for terrorists. Acting U.S. Attorney June Kim.
In the short time since this attack, we have developed evidence establishing that Saipov committed this attack in support of ISIS.
CBS News senior legal analyst Andrew Cohn.
The filing of the complaint means that the suspect now will be given a court-appointed attorney if he can't afford one, a lawyer who will begin to act on behalf of a suspect who likely won't be able to put on a very strong defense.
Watch it gush out of your TV. Rick Davis is on national TV.
Be a request for a change of venue out of Lower
coins,
Manhattan. That's a request that almost always is denied.
President Trump called the suspect an animal and said he wants to shut down the visa program that allowed him to come to the U.S.
Just a few hours before the terrorism charges were announced, the president said this.
Send him to Gitmo.
White House spokeswoman Sarah Sanders added,
we would consider this person to be an enemy combatant.
So will Sayfullah Saipov wind up before a military tribunal and not a civilian court? Sanders said that determination had not been made. The Supreme Court ruled in 2004 that the president can deem a U.S. citizen an enemy combatant, but that person must have the right to challenge that status. Stephen Portnoy, CBS News, the White House.
It's the deadliest terror attack in New York since 9/11. CBS's Matt Piper.
The death toll stands at 8. 6 were foreigners visiting, 2 were Americans, locals, 1 from New Jersey, and 1 who lived just a few blocks from where he was hit. Of the 12 injured, 9 remain hospitalized. 4 are in critical condition, 5 with serious injuries.
The two Trump campaign officials charged in the Russia investigation are due back in court tomorrow. CBS's Paula Reed says court documents offer new information on former campaign chairman Paul Manafort.
The special counsel says earlier this year, Manafort registered a phone and email under an alias and then traveled to Mexico, China, and Ecuador. According to the document, Manafort has 3 U.S. passports with different numbers.
The Federal Reserve is leaving interest rates as is for now. Economist Hugh Johnson.
The Fed has given you a fairly upbeat assessment of the state of the U.S. economy, and inflation remains low, and at least for now, they're not raising interest rates.
Stocks are mixed today. The Dow was up 57. NASDAQ slipped 11 points. Now this.
I'm Jay Farner from Quicken Loans. The rate today on a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage is 3.875%, APR 4.05%. But choosing the right mortgage lender means choosing much more than just a rate. Let me ask you, does calling the company with the best client service in America, with 11 J.D. Power Awards to prove it, matter? Does calling the company that invented Rocket Mortgage, the industry's most innovative, client-focused technology, matter? Does calling the company with 17,000 plus team members who are helping to rebuild the great cities of Detroit and Cleveland matter? Of course it matters. No wonder our clients have made Quicken Loans America's #1 online lender. Call Quicken Loans today at 800-QUICKEN or go to rocketmortgage.com for the best mortgage experience on earth. Quicken.
Call for cost information and conditions. Equal housing lender licensed in all 50 states. NMLSconsumeraccess.org number 3030.
A tax reform plan will be unveiled tomorrow. But how do Americans feel about it? CBS's Jennifer DePinto.
More than half would like to see tax increases for large corporations and the wealthy, while at least 6 in 10 want middle-class Americans and small businesses to get a tax cut.
Are untouched, but the House plan gets rid of the deduction for state income taxes, something opposed by Republicans in high-tax states. 2 more high-profile men are out of jobs because of sexual harassment allegations, including British Defense Minister Michael Fallon. The BBC's Alex Forsyth reads part of a letter he wrote to the Prime Minister.
I accept that in the past, I have fallen below the high standards that we require of the armed forces. He said he's reflected on his position and therefore chosen to resign as Defense Secretary.
And NPR News chief Michael Oreskes was ousted after being accused of improper behavior when he worked for the New York Times. You're listening to the CBS World News Roundup.
Traffic, news, and information.
Geico
Nooga
presents
Radio.
Eyewitness
Digital
interviews
FM
with inanimate
95.3
objects.
HD4.
This is Belinda Collins, live on the scene of a recent
90.7
kitchen
FM.
fire. Here to describe the event, a refrigerator.
I was just chilling, keeping some lettuce and dairy products cold. When the toaster
Nooga
started
Radio.
shooting sparks.
Digital
Next thing I
FM
know, he lit a
95.3
cabinet on
HD4.
fire.
Did you try and stop the
92.7
flames?
FM's
I'm a
news.
refrigerator, not a fireman.
An 11-year-old boy crumpled by a hit-and-run driver in a black sedan. This happened at 3 p.m. on Dodson Avenue in Chattanooga. The police say the young man tried to cross the roadway when a driver coming the opposite direction hit him and then sped away before the police could get there. They're now trying to track down a black sedan. The young man in stable condition at the hospital. Firefighters in Collegedale were fighting a house fire when an explosion rocked the building, breaking windows and throwing 2 volunteer firefighters out the front door onto the front porch. They were taken to the hospital for treatment for minor injuries. The house fire was taken into control and damage is still being estimated. The cause of the explosion also being investigated. The man who was killed in an industrial accident in Dalton, Georgia at the Shaw plant has been identified as Jesus Pimentel. He was crushed between 2 pieces of machinery. Russell Stroud, Nooga Radio News Talk 92.7. Now.
Expect lots of clouds and milder weather out there through your nighttime hours. Lows into the lower 50s. For Thursday and Friday, mostly cloudy. A few windy, scattered showers will move through. Warm highs into the lower 70s with more unseasonably warm weather back into the mid-70s for the weekend. Head to the JCPenney Black Friday mattress sale. Now through Saturday, get 60% off mattresses from brands like Sealy, Serta, Beautyrest, and Stearns & Foster. That's getting your pennies worth at JCPenney. And I'm Storm Team 12 Chief Meteorologist Patrick Ward.
Broadcasting live to over 1 million souls in Chattanooga, the Tennessee Valley, and beyond on frequency modulation 92.7. Sean Hannity, 25,000 watts on digital FM 95.3 HD4. CBS Radio News. NASCAR, Bloomberg Markets, David Tulis, streaming strong at NoogaRadio.com. Live on YouTube and Facebook. Nooga Radio, News Talk 92.7. Chattanooga Radio.
You're listening to 92.7 FM, Nooga Radio, and NoogaRadio.com. The show is Clutch with Keon Rose. This is hour number 2 of the show. Can't stress this enough. Cannot stress this enough. If you are incompetent, be incompetent, right? Like it's hard to get out of a cycle of being bad at your job. Because most people can't admit that they're bad at their job, don't really want to change, wind up not changing. The Cleveland Browns are really bad at being a football team, right? And this isn't really a Brown story so much as a competence story that the Browns specialize in not necessarily having, right? But it does involve A.J. McCarron, who, former Alabama quarterback. And when was the last time we had a starting quarterback in the NFL be an Alabama quarterback? But you're Cleveland and you're desperate for a quarterback, right? Like you just need somebody to play. You can't trust DeShone Kizer because he's young, he's immature, he's raw. Brian Kelly warned everybody that DeShone Kizer was raw when he came out, and he still came out, and the Browns still drafted him, I presume with the intent of developing him. But they ain't have anybody else to start. So DeShone Kizer is their best actual option. So before the trade deadline, the actual wacky trade deadline that, in the NFL, before the trade deadline where we had Kelvin Benjamin make his way to Buffalo, we saw Jimmy Garoppolo find his way in San Francisco. I mean, we had all kinds of trades. And yet, here we are at this particular juncture in time. And the Cleveland Browns tried to trade for A.J. McCarron, and they don't have A.J. McCarron to show for it. They don't have A.J. McCarron to show for it. So that's a problem, right? Most obviously a problem. How do they not have A.J. McCarron show for it? Well, I'll tell you. They didn't fill out the paperwork and turn it into the NFL in time. They were moments too late. They did not beat the 4 p.m. NFL trade deadline, and now they still have no quarterback. Now, maybe you could have had the argument and conversation about whether or not A.J. McCarron was the actual answer at quarterback for the Cleveland Browns. My thought is probably not. But he had to be better than what they had going on. Right? He's a guy that's been in the league a little bit. A.J. McCarron was decent at Alabama. He's got to know something. He's got to be more polished than DeShone Kizer. He's got to be a better thrower of the football than Kevin Hogan. You've just got to try. And the Browns botched the trade. The Browns have no quarterback. It is the most Browns thing that ever happened. In fairness. It is the most Cleveland Browns thing that anyone has ever done. In the history of that entire organization. It's unbelievable how poorly run that organization is. They have the season that they have this year, and they somehow fire Hugh Jackson. And I will tell you what. That organization's not worth anything. Clutch with Keon Rose at Nooga Radio, NoogaRadio.com. Like, if the Browns wanted to hire you, would you even take the job? Like, I'd take the job because NFL coach makes more money than what I currently make. I would take the job. But if you are an actual guy trying to make your name as an NFL head coach, do you take that job? Who wants to work for that organization? So you can rack up a bunch of losses on your coaching record so people can go, oh, look, you're 0-32 as a coach. Well, it's not your fault. You coached the Browns. Come on. Anyway, so Jarrett Stidham is a guy that is the reason why Auburn football is potentially pretty exciting right now. College football playoff ranking, Auburn is number 14 at 6-2. Probably and most likely can't leapfrog enough people to potentially wind up in the top 10. But at 14, that's not a bad place to be, especially if you're Auburn, because you lost a couple of games, but you lost one game to LSU, who is the other good team in your league, right? Because we've got like 4 good teams in the SEC. You've got Alabama, Auburn, LSU, and Georgia, right? Those are your good teams. Alabama and Georgia are on one level, and then Auburn and LSU are on another level before that. Auburn loses to LSU, and Auburn's only other loss is to Clemson. Their only other loss is to the school ranked 4th in the college football playoff. Now, we'll see if that holds true, because they still have to play Alabama to end the season, and they still need to play Georgia in 2 weeks. But at this moment, you've got 2 losses, and they're pretty decent quality losses. You haven't lost anybody horrible, really, and they've played a lot of games where Jarrett Stidham has looked like a real star. And I remember being at the beginning of the season, people were hesitating to question or to crown Jarrett Stidham the savior of Auburn football. But is he not? Because they look like a real football team this year. They look like an actual legitimate football team, in large part because of him, because they did not look very good last year, right? When you talk about football that was hard to watch, the combination of Jeremy Johnson and Sean White, and them flip-flopping back and forth between those 2 guys to try and figure out which guy was the least worst guy to play the quarterback position. Jarrett Stidham has been everything that he has been advertised to be and more. And he's managed to show how consistently good he can actually be. Jarrett Stidham is the real deal. He absolutely is. What I want to know, though, is, are people ready to walk that back? Because the initial analysis of Jarrett Stidham was, well, maybe he's not as great as we thought, especially after that loss to Clemson, where Jarrett Stidham ran for his life the entire game and ate about 11 sacks. Just got sacked 11 times, which that's what most quarterbacks wind up being sacked for a whole season. But it didn't crush his confidence, and he continued to play very high-level football all throughout the season. Right? He did disappear in the second half of that LSU game, but I would argue that all the Auburn Tigers disappeared in the second half of that game, not just him. Like, he's done a really good job. And also, what does that say about Gus Malzahn? Because Gus Malzahn is a guy, I made the same argument for Gus Malzahn that I made for Jim McElwain. Gus Malzahn looks good and still has a job. Jim McElwain now doesn't have one. The Gus Malzahn is one of those guys. He's considered an offensive guru, which I hate to call people that, for all the reasons I mentioned before. But he also is a very talented offensive coach. Like, that, just because I don't want to call him a guru doesn't mean that he's not a very talented coach. And what is the one thing that talented offensive coaches need? They need a quarterback. They need a quarterback. That is not optional, right? And you can't just say, well, why don't you make a system where you have a system quarterback? Because that's hard to do, right? And even quarterbacks that are system quarterbacks still need to be good to play in a system. You don't just show up and go, oh, well, the system's so great, I can't help but throw 4 touchdowns a game. Otherwise, why not just grab some dude up off the street to be your quarterback? Like, you need talented guys. Jarrett Stidham certainly is a talented guy. I mean, he absolutely is. I mean, this is clearly insanity. This idea that somehow we're going to look at Jarrett Stidham and people thumb their nose down at Jarrett Stidham. They refuse to admit or acknowledge that he was a good quarterback when he looked good. And then in games where he played bad or so-so, people had no problem condemning him. And so I'm trying to re-examine Jarrett Stidham right now, because I think that he's shown a lot of the poise and a lot of the talent that made him highly sought after. And Gus Malzahn choosing Jarrett Stidham couldn't have been a better choice for his coaching career. Could not have been best decision of his whole life, of his whole coaching life. Has to be the decision to pursue Jarrett Stidham to be his quarterback, because Jarrett Stidham doesn't fit the mold of a typical Gus Malzahn quarterback, right? Like the mold of a typical Gus Malzahn quarterback is a guy that can run the ball better than he can throw it usually, but he should also be able to throw it. Like don't mix this up. Also throw the ball. Jarrett Stidham is a guy that throws the ball better than he runs it. He can run it pretty well, right? He's quick. Don't get that mixed up. He's a very quick quarterback, but ultimately Jarrett Stidham is the guy that is a passing quarterback. He feels more comfortable in the pocket, and you can see it. It doesn't really fit into the Gus Malzahn style, and yet here we are, a Jarrett Stidham. And look, what I like about Auburn, what I like about LSU this year is this. They have a chance to derail Alabama. And part of the fun of watching Alabama is the opportunity to derail Alabama, right? That is a constant storyline. Who is going to be the school to trip up the Crimson Tide? Usually it's nobody. Ole Miss got to do it for a couple of years in a row, but usually nobody really gets to trip up Alabama. Sometimes Alabama trips up Alabama better than you can. Right? Where they lose, they had that loss like 5 years ago or whatever to an FCS school. Georgia Cumberland or somebody. I don't remember exactly who it was. But they tripped themselves up in that game. It's hard to find someone who can trip up Bama. And so the fact that Auburn and LSU both have legitimate chances to do it, LSU, because their defense is astounding, and they have the kind of running game that might be able to puncture Alabama's horrifying defense. And Auburn, because Auburn also has an incredible defense, right? Auburn has a completely underrated defense. And I think that if Auburn were undefeated, we'd be marveling about their defense the way we marvel about Georgia's defense. Auburn's defense is great. And Jarrett Stidham is the real deal. And I think that you put that up against Alabama, those are the ingredients. Those are the ingredients. A quarterback who can throw the ball accurately is mobile. Now, Stidham's not as mobile as some of the guys that have beaten Alabama in the past. And then also you need like a world-class defense. Auburn's got the ingredients. And you need to re-examine Jarrett Stidham because you don't get to be surprised if in the Iron Bowl he shows up and really makes a name for himself. Because it's funny to me that we're having all of this conversation about quarterbacks who can go in the NFL draft, and Jarrett Stidham's name never comes up. His name doesn't come up with the Darnolds and the Rosens, and I think he's every bit as good as those guys. And sometimes I watch Jarrett Stidham, and I'm sure he's better, right? Maybe like Darnold's having a down year. USC lost a lot of talent, but like Josh Rosen to me, I've never been on the Josh Rosen train. I've just never been on the train. Like I watch Josh Rosen, I'm not impressed. So I don't necessarily see it. I like Jarrett Stidham a lot, though. I think he's legitimate. Clutch with Keon Rose on Nooga Radio, NoogaRadio.com. So Florida's going to be hiring a new head coach. The issue now is, what is the level of expectations to put on that guy? That's a legitimate question. What can you expect from the next head coach of the University of Florida? Because Florida has all the ingredients to be a completely impatient school within a completely impatient fan base, right? They're talented. The talent is on the team. The talent is there. If someone can get this talent to come together and to play well, right? Maximize their running of the football and their passing of the football. help the development along of Felipe Franks. The talent is there to win right away. And Florida's defense has never been bad, right? You can say whatever you want about Jim McElwain this whole time. The offense never got to where it needed to be, but it's not like he allowed the defense to waste away while he was there. The defense is pretty decent. Defense is pretty good. One of the better defenses in the SEC, actually. So the talent is there to win. Whoever you hire next, would you not just want that person to grab all the talent that's there, pull it together, and see if you could make something that works, right? The other reason why you would be impatient if you were Florida and you were a Florida fan is Georgia, because Georgia is another school that decided to move on from their head coach. There was talent on the roster, and Kirby Smart had a year to figure it out, and then now he's put together some juggernaut of a football team. That is what this is. This team is some kind of juggernaut in a way that is exceptionally monstrous, right? And if you're Florida and you're also in the East and you used to beat up Georgia all the time, why wouldn't you want a piece of that? Why wouldn't you want a quick turnaround? And I understand that replacing Jim McElwain is not the same thing as replacing Mark Richt. Replacing Mark Richt means that you at least come in and there's stuff in the pantry to work with, right? You come in and there's talent here. You just need to get that team to play the way you want them to play. But Kirby Smart's done some incredible things outside of already having some of Mark Richt's talent, right? One is that he has done an incredible job recruiting for his own self. Had one of the better recruiting jobs in the entire nation. And then the other thing that Kirby Smart has done entirely well, as he has just put his fingerprints all over this football team. He has turned this team into what he wants it to be. He is a defensive guy. This team plays alarming defense. And then they run the ball very well, and they run the ball better than almost anybody else in the country. The next coach of Florida is going to have to do something similar to that, or he might find that the clock is ticking on him too. The other thing is that this is Nick Saban's world, man. We're all just living in it. Really, what we all want is what Alabama and Nick Saban has got, which is consistent success. That's what we want. And if you're Florida, the temptation to get there as quickly as possible is going to be high. But here's the thing. Just because you have the talent, just because Georgia managed to turn around fast, and just because you want to chase Alabama and Saban the way that everybody wants to chase Alabama and Saban, and that's not even an SEC thing, that's just an everybody thing, really. Just because that's what you want doesn't mean that's what you're going to get. And how much patience should you have if you're a Florida fan? Because I think that you should still have a little bit of patience. There has to be some good reason why Florida's offense never took off, right? Like maybe there's no good reason. Maybe it was the play calling in Florida. Maybe Jim McElwain just really never developed the talent particularly well. Like maybe there is no good reason. And the next guy that you hire right ahead and just takes you to a new level, because we have seen it, right? We've seen Jim Harbaugh show up at Michigan, and immediately Michigan is a watchable, good football team, to the point where now people are actually disappointed, even though Harbaugh had them ahead of schedule. Yeah. If you are Florida, you need to still exercise some patience, because look, Jim McElwain's not Mark Richt, right? Like, yeah, there's talent on this Florida team, but it's one thing to go out there and win with Mark Richt's players, who I think we all agree Mark Richt is an incredible coach and also an incredible recruiter, right? Like a superior recruiter, I would say, to Jim McElwain. So even though Florida's got talent, I wouldn't say the level of talent is as high. And then whoever you hire next, if they don't have a particularly strong personality, then yeah, I would pump the brakes on this person being the person that turns you around incredibly quickly. Because I think you have to have a strong personality to coach at a school like that. To coach at a school like that that expects to win like that, your personality has to be strong. Saban, strong personality. Smart, strong personality. That Kirby Smart is a grouch, right? I mean, and look around all of college football. Urban Meyer, strong personality. Harbaugh, strong personality. David Shaw, strong personality. I mean, all of these guys have strong Dabo Swinney. All these guys have strong personalities. And what they do is they just implant their personality on the whole football team. Like, I don't know how good Tom Herman's going to be at Texas, but he's got a strong personality. That helps. Yeah, you can't coach with your personality, but you do, because your team plays like you. Right? Especially in college. This is not the pros where you show up and you've got a bunch of guys who've already lived life experiences, and so they've already got their own thing going on. Young guys haven't really experienced anything yet. They're going to take their personality cues from their head coach. You're going to take your personality cues from Mike Leach and Dabo Swinney. You will. Especially if those guys are successful and can lead you to success. Right? People take personality cues from Coach K. They talk about personality types in psychology. Introvertedness versus extrovertedness, right? Like, I'm an introvert. I don't like people very much. I don't particularly enjoy being around people. But it's more complicated than that, right? There's a couple of dimensions to introvertedness and extrovertedness. One dimension is, are you dominant with people, right? Do you like to show up and dominate people, or do you like to not to, which is a leadership trait, right? Like, I don't like to. I'm not trying to walk into a room and have a bunch of people really interested in my whereabouts. But then you've got the other part of it, which is, do you like people or not, right? Which is why you find that a lot of people, there are a lot of leaders who are maybe introverts, right? Like, maybe they don't like being out amongst people, but they also like dominating a room. So what ends up happening, of course, is that they don't like going out with people, but when they walk into a room, everybody notices when they show up. You find this of a lot of presidents, by the way. You need somebody with a dominant personality. They show up and everybody in the room takes notice, because that does affect coaching, and that does affect leadership, and whether or not your locker room falls into line, and whether or not your team looks like you. If you're a guy that wants strong defense and you don't have that strong personality, it's not going to happen for you. You're going to look a little bit soft. It might be a Butch Jones problem. Clutch with Keon Rose on 92.7 FM, Nooga Radio, and NoogaRadio.com.
The Tennessee Valley's news talk leader, Nooga Radio, digital FM 95.3 HD4 and 92.7 FM.
3, 2, 1.
Chattanooga Radio, digital FM 95.3 HD4, 92.7 FM's news now.
An 11-year-old boy crumpled by a hit-and-run driver in a black sedan. This happened at 3 p.m. on Dodson Avenue in Chattanooga. The police say the young man tried to cross the roadway when a driver coming the opposite direction hit him and then sped away before the police could get there. They're now trying to track down a black sedan. The young man in stable condition at the hospital. Firefighters in Collegedale were fighting a house fire when an explosion rocked the building, breaking windows and throwing 2 volunteer firefighters out the front door onto the front porch. They were taken to the hospital for treatment for minor injuries. The house fire was taken into control, and damage is still being estimated. The cause of the explosion also being investigated. The man who was killed in an industrial accident in Dalton, Georgia at the Shaw plant has been identified as Jesus Pimentel. He was crushed between 2 pieces of machinery. Russell Stroud, Nooga Radio News Talk 92.7. Now.
Traffic, news, and information. Nooga Radio, digital FM 95.3 HD4 and 92.7 FM.
Goss Insurance. Yes, we are local. And no, we don't have an 800 number. In fact, our mobile numbers are on our business cards. We live, work, play, and worship in Chattanooga, and we would love to help with your insurance. Business, auto, home, life insurance. Call now, save money. Call Goss Insurance for all your insurance needs. Goss Insurance, 875-2500. 875-2500.
Power Hour News at noon and 9 being brought to you by Greg's Sandwich Works, featuring the best cuts of meats for your sandwich. Get $1 off your Tuesday taco salad. Just mention Nooga Radio. Greg's Sandwich Works, 6337 East Brainerd Road, Chattanooga.
Nooga Radio, digital FM 95.3 HD4 and 92.7 FM knows your opinion is important. So call 800-8949. Agree or disagree. Call 423-800-8949. 800-8949. Nooga Radio, 92.7 FM and 95.3 HD4. News Talk Nooga Radio.
So let's get into some NFL talk really quickly. First story is that against the Eagles, the Broncos are going to be starting Brock Osweiler. Brock Osweiler is once again a starting quarterback in this league. Now, I think that Brock Osweiler's gotten a very, very bad rap. He has. He's earned most of it. But I think we kill Brock Lobster a little bit more than we should probably kill Brock Lobster. Because, honestly, it's not his fault he got paid as much money as he got paid. And he played as well as he could play. And yeah, the Texans paid him way too much money. And they should have known that they were paying him way too much money. The Browns bailed him out, but the Browns had their own financial reasons for bailing him out. Now he's back in Denver, making much less, or being paid by Denver much less money. He's still being paid that money by the Browns, I suppose. But he's making much less money in Denver. And to me, this is fascinating. It's fascinating because the reason why the Denver Broncos are even rolling with Brock Osweiler in the first place is because Trevor Siemian looks like straight garbage, right? Just looks like he cannot play the game at all. And this is nothing to do with the mental capacity, right? Which we do actually judge harshly, Brock Osweiler for that, because he doesn't seem to process the information as quickly and as accurately as you would like, which is the reason why he looks like a bad quarterback most of the time. But I will defend people who make quarterback decisions based on, does the guy look the part? And Brock Osweiler certainly looks the part of a good quarterback. He's big, he's tall, he's strong, he's got the strong arm. Why do people make these kinds of decisions, right? Well, because if you don't make those kinds of decisions, you wind up with Trevor Siemian, a guy who can be an average quarterback when he's got all his arm strength. The fact of the matter is that doesn't last very long through the season. And he is struggling to throw the ball 20 yards. 20! That's not even a deep pass in this league. When we talk about a guy struggling with his deep ball, yeah, it might not be accurate 40, 50, 60 yards downfield. Brock Osweiler is legit, or not Brock Osweiler, Trevor Siemian is legitimately struggling with 20-yard throws. That's not just bad, that's horrible. He's struggling to get the ball 20 yards up the field. Like, that looks like a deep throw. And to be fair, that would be a deep throw for most of us, right? But NFL quarterbacks are freaks. Throwing the ball 50 yards regularly is part of their job description. If you can't even get that happening accurately, you might as well kiss your job goodbye. And so the reason why teams worry so much about whether or not a guy looks the part of a quarterback is in large part because there's situations where that matters, right? There are some guys that, yeah, they don't look the part of a quarterback, or we worry about whether or not they look the part of a quarterback, and then they wind up being every bit a quarterback. Like Deshaun Watson, people worried about his arm strength and his height and the velocity of his throwing motion. And the same thing was said about Russell Wilson. People worried about that too. And you can make that same case for Tyrod Taylor. A lot of these guys are on the shorter side of being an NFL quarterback and not necessarily gifted with the greatest arm strength on earth. So, yeah, these are guys that are playing very good football that don't look the part. Right? Cam Newton looks the part. Ben Roethlisberger looks the part. Even Blake Bortles, bad as he is, looks the part. Trevor Siemian doesn't look the part, and he's what happens when you take a gamble on a guy that doesn't look the part. The arm strength is just not there. And the Broncos having to play Brock Osweiler now is some kind of irony in a way that I find to be deeply humorous. That he started there, he left for more money, and now he's back, and they're not really paying him much. Like, they're really not. Clutch with Keon Rose on Nooga Radio. NoogaRadio.com. So that's one story. The other story is that Corey Davis, the young receiver that the Titans drafted to try and give Marcus Mariota some weaponry, right? Because that's the thing that you need if you're going to be trying to develop a young quarterback. You also need a head coach that understands modern NFL offenses. So the dream still continues on the malarkey train, because I'm off the malarkey train. I'm so far off the malarkey train, it's not even funny. But I think he holds him back. But here's the thing. Having an explosive wide receiver might be helpful. Corey Davis is very quick, and he's one of those elusive guys. He runs incredible routes, and I think that this is a John Robinson draft pick that people are doubting the draft pick. But how many John Robinson draft picks are you going to doubt before you realize this guy's a great GM, right? Even if Corey Davis is a whiff, the things that he was looking at when he drafted Corey Davis, and a lot of people thought maybe he should have drafted any other receiver in this draft, basically, even though a couple of other receivers in this draft got injured. And people thought that the Titans took Corey Davis way too high in the draft. I don't think so. I like Corey Davis a lot. Yes, Corey Davis has problems with his hands, but it's not that he can't catch. When you look at Corey Davis, and Corey Davis is struggling to catch the football, the one thing that I seem to notice from all the time I spent watching Corey Davis, because this is what happens. If I'm following a team and they draft a guy, I watch every video that exists on the internet of that guy. The thing that I've noticed from Corey Davis is that he starts to try and run upfield before he's caught the football. He needs to see the ball into his hands first before he starts to go upfield. But he's an incredible receiver and a very, very good athlete. And to me, you can't coach the things that he's got, right? Like, just being flat out fast, can't coach that. You actually can coach route running, which he's very good at, but it's nice when a guy is a rookie to not have to, right? To not have to coach route running. That is an incredible thing. Clutch with Keon Rose on Nooga Radio, NoogaRadio.com. So I'm excited about that. If the Corey Davis pick does actually develop into something, that would be, to me, that would be the win of the Titans offseason. But this is a team that's 4-3, and I think that they could be a whole lot better than 4-3. Struggling to score against the Dolphins. They lose 10-16. They weren't even in the game with the Texans. And they struggled to score against the Raiders in week 1. And to me, I struggle with this notion of the exotic smash mouth, because when you draft a guy like a Corey Davis, you are drafting him to be explosive downfield. And I don't like that the Titans are too reserved early on in football games, and only when they are down and only when they need to score do they open up the offense in a manner that allows them to go out there and get something done. I'm not a huge fan of that. It's too complacent. It's too passive. I don't think passive wins you anything. The Titans are coming off a bye week, and I think that rest is going to help them. They're playing the Ravens, and at this point, man, God even knows what you get out of the Ravens. I mean, the Ravens can give you a 50-point game like they did on Thursday night last week, and the Ravens could give you nothing. I don't even know what Ravens team is going to show up, but if you want a chance to beat the Ravens, whose defense decides to show up one week and not the other, if you want to actually beat the Ravens and you're the Tennessee Titans, here's something that you could possibly consider doing. Throw the ball early in the game. You've got your young quarterback. He's completely healthy after his bye week. You've got your young receiver coming off of an injury where basically he hasn't played the whole year thus far. He's just been doing rehab. Show up and go over the top. That's the whole point of having Marcus Mariota, right? And then drafting Corey Davis. And I like Corey Davis, as I mentioned. I mean, I think that he is incredibly underrated and one of the more underrated players in this draft because everyone just kept on going about his hands. His hands are fine. Yes, he needs to learn to keep his eyes on the football first before trying to go upfield and make a play. But he's not bad at catching the football. That's not the same thing. This is not one of those situations where I remember years back the Raiders drafted Darius Hayward-Bay. They drafted Darius Hayward-Bay. And Darius Hayward-Bay, speed demon. Speed demon. Possibly one of the fastest guys I've ever seen play football in my whole life. But not that you got to see it very often because he couldn't catch the ball. That was a situation where the guy had bad hands. Darius Hayward-Bay legitimately had bad hands. He just wasn't a catcher of the football, right? You could make plays with him, and when he did catch the football, he was destructive, but it wasn't consistent. You couldn't rely on it. You couldn't game plan with it. Right? You couldn't game plan with it. Clutch with Keon Rose on Nooga Radio, NoogaRadio.com. And of course, the last thing is Kelvin Benjamin is involved in one of those trades that I like. One of those trades that just produces really odd stats. So Kelvin Benjamin was traded from the Panthers to the Bills earlier before the deadline yesterday. And Kelvin Benjamin is playing for the Bills now, played for the Panthers. Both of those teams played the Atlanta Falcons 3 times this season. Kelvin Benjamin, because of the nature of this trade, will play the Atlanta Falcons no times this season, despite playing for 2 teams that played for him 3 times. Also, Kelvin Benjamin missed the bye week for the Bills, and he got traded before the bye week of the Panthers, which means that Kelvin Benjamin is by himself a man with no bye week. None. And is in fact going to play, if he remains healthy, all 17 weeks of the NFL season. All 17 weeks of the NFL season. Which is incredible. And a little bit more news on the Garoppolo trade. A little bit more news on the Garoppolo trade. Kyle Shanahan said on Jimmy Garoppolo, I can't promise you that he will play this year. Which to me is great news if you're Jimmy Garoppolo. Because if you're Jimmy Garoppolo, the last thing on earth that you want to do, and this is just if you're thinking financially, right? Forget the fact that you're an athlete and you're a competitor and all that stuff. You're a human being first, and human beings like money. If you want to maximize your financial potential, the best thing to do would be to not play. That would be the good thing to do. Don't play. Now, I'm not saying if you're Jimmy Garoppolo, ask if you can't play. I'm saying if the team is totally cool with not letting you play, don't try that hard to play. Because here's the deal with Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy Garoppolo had an opportunity to be Mike Glennon and Brock Osweiler. What do we know about Mike Glennon and Brock Osweiler? Mike Glennon and Brock Osweiler didn't do much. Didn't do much. And they got huge deals, right? Mike Glennon didn't get a deal that was that big, but he got a deal that was way too big for him being Mike Glennon. That's a fact. He wanted that kind of deal, right? Like Jimmy Garoppolo got to play in a couple of games. He got to look pretty good, and then he doesn't have to prove anything. If Jimmy Garoppolo rides out his time in New England, right, the Patriots never trade Garoppolo. then pretty much he gets to make a contract off of potential. And there's nothing better than a potential contract. Potential contract is way better than the contract that you earn. Because potential is intangible. If you have a good enough agent, your agent can talk up your potential to the sky and back. Yeah. So the potential contract is better. This is the thing. Unless you're Kirk Cousins and you're coming off of franchise tag after franchise tag, the contract that you compare, or the contract with potential, is way better than the contract that you earn. And Brock Osweiler would not have gotten the deal that he got if he had to earn his contract, which we all know. He didn't have to earn it. And if you're Jimmy Garoppolo, that's the contract you want. You want the deal you don't have to earn. You want to get paid on sheer potential. And you know what? Maybe you turn out to be good. Maybe you even turn out to be worth it. I would rather be paid on potential than be paid on what I have actually done. Because what I've actually done is quantifiable. What I have actually done, there is a number for that. Right? Jimmy Garoppolo, it's in your best interest to not really play. So if Kyle Shanahan doesn't want you to play, and it sounds like Kyle Shanahan doesn't want you to play, I wouldn't try that hard to play. I don't know. That's just me. Right? Forget being a competitor for a while. Just being a fan of money, which all people are. Even the people that say that they don't want to be a fan of money, people like the stuff that money can get them, or people really just don't like not having money. That's the other position to take. You're a fan of money. That's the obvious best way to go. Right? Like, this isn't even about laziness. That is just, come on, man. It's easy pickings. Cleveland Browns did the most Cleveland Browns thing ever. They failed to notify the league office that they were making a trade before the trade deadline. Marvin Jones, who was willing to trade his backup quarterback, A.J. McCarron, said that he doesn't know why it is that the Browns were not able to make that trade. And I quote, "All you have to do is notify the league office you're making a deal. That's an easy thing." So this is not a gigantic process. All you have to do is call up the NFL and say, "Hey, I want to make a deal. This is who I am trading. This is who I will be receiving, and from what team I will be receiving that person from." And then the league office will clear your trade. Like, there was no reason for the Browns to not have made the trade that they didn't make. How does that even happen? Do you just have a bunch of people in an office going, "Oh, I thought you called the office. I didn't call the office. You called the office." How does that happen? I mean, there are plenty of accidents. There are plenty of accidents that happen, but like, not the one where it's obvious what to do. Right? Where you could just call somebody and just have it be done. I mean, I would say that that's laziness. Is that even laziness? It's one thing if you're a person and you don't do your job. I don't have any love for people who don't do their job. Do your job. But if your job is easy, though, right? Like, if your job's not even hard, how do you manage not to do it? Right? Like, this is the reason why when we go to fast food restaurants, we don't have very much patience. But if you go to a fine dining restaurant, you have a little bit more patience. Why? Well, because in a fast food restaurant, and I've worked in fast food, in a fast food restaurant, they have a bunch of stuff that's simplified for anybody to do it. Like, literally anybody could do that job. Right? Maybe as you start to climb and you get to higher managerial levels, and not everybody could do that job, but certainly at the lower levels, anybody could do that job. Not everybody is really good at juggling tables at cooking steak. Like, when you go to a fine dining restaurant, you have more patience with the people that work there because the job's not easy, right? It's not the hardest job in the world, but the job's not easy either. It does take a little bit of wherewithal and a little bit of comprehension to figure out what you need to be doing. Fast food is not so. You work at a fast food restaurant and they have you cooking the food inside of a week, especially if they really need the help. They'll have you cooking the food inside of the next 3 or 4 days. They'll have you at the register taking orders that day. You just walked in off the street and are doing the job that no one ever trained you to do before. You don't have patience for when people don't do their job and their job is easy, right? Like, if you don't do your job and your job is hard, I get it. Like, if you fail to do your job and your job is lawyer, look, you shouldn't fail to do your job still, but I've got sympathy for you. Your job's tough, right? You work 70, 80 hours a week, and maybe you missed something. That's not an easy job. And you were in law school forever to just get all the knowledge that you know that I don't know. Job's tough, man. I get it. This is the Cleveland Browns. One thing to not do your job properly. It's another thing to not do your job at all, and your job is easy. And the job was simply pick up the phone and let the league know you were making a trade. How on earth does that happen? And now you have no quarterback. And you haven't won a football game yet this year, and you may not. You may not. And if you don't win a football game this year because your quarterbacks were all bad, someone's got to get fired now. Like, someone really needs to get fired. I don't know who. But come on, man. That's ridiculous. That is absolutely ridiculous. You're listening to Clutch with Keon Rose on Nooga Radio, NoogaRadio.com. Game 7 of the World Series is tonight. The last one. And then we've got no baseball. We've got no baseball after this. Now, last night, I thought that the Astros were going to put it away. That was my feeling. I saw Verlander was going to be pitching, and I thought, look, Verlander's tough. It's hard to beat Verlander. And Verlander tends to be really good when everything's on the line. And that's his first loss, I believe, since becoming an Astro. So yeah, I was very much thrown off by that. Now, the probable starters for tonight. The Astros are probably going to start Lance McCullers. And the Dodgers are probably going to have to start Yu Darvish, which means we are going to see some scoring tonight because Yu Darvish has been pretty good. But, you know, he's 2-1 in the postseason, 4.15 ERA. He hasn't been perfect. And Lance McCullers has been better. But again, I don't know anybody that's been completely like, oh yeah, I'm terrified of Lance McCullers. Like I like him. But I think that the Dodgers and the Astros, look, we got a great World Series. We got another one. We had a great one last year. We have another one this year. And all the storylines add up. Do the people of Houston get something to root for? Do the Dodgers finally break their incredibly long drought without a World Series and bring a title to LA? All of those questions will be answered in about half an hour. That's when the first pitch is going to be thrown. And it seems like a fitting end to a really great Major League Baseball season. Clutch with Keon Rose on 92.7 FM, Nooga Radio, NoogaRadio.com.